and this is in honor of Major Kenn Rodzinyak of the Royal Canadian Air Force. So a little backstory there. All of us at the International Space University, we are deeply saddened by the sudden loss of our alumnus, Kenn Rodzinyak. He was a multi-talented maritime patrol air navigator and a Canadian military gentleman. He had a passion for space, and he was heavily involved in ISU. He attended the ISU Space Studies program in Strasbourg, France in 2006. He was an active member of Team Project Sol, which is Earth observation systems for small countries and regions. And thanks to him, many folks, many cadets from the Canadian military forces either attended an ISU program or took part in support in the staff. He was a guest lecturer and volunteer staff himself during several SSPs. In 2021, the director, Gaktu, added, Kenn was a wonderful colleague with many skills and strong work ethic. He spent the summer in Spain serving as chief of staff for editor for team projects of the 2021 Space Studies program. He not only brought his knowledge to the team, but also a great sense of humor to brighten up everyone's mood during the very busy and intense times. He will be greatly missed by all of us, and all of our thoughts are with his lovely wife, Angela, daughter, Kristen, who are also part of the ISU community, and his two other daughters, Daphne and Selena. So our condolences still go out to the family and friends as he is sorely missed. We will all remember his great spirit, and we will honor him tonight with this distinguished lecture. Next, I will introduce to you Neve Shaw. She is the mediator of this tonight's event. She is an Irish award-winning communicator, writer, and explorer of space activities. She was recently titled ESA Champion in Education by the European Space Agency for her work in public engagement. Her work focuses on sharing the bigger perspective of space to envisage a healthier, fairer, and more equal, sustainable planet. She is a global faculty member. She is an alumnus of SSP 15 and has been providing content for space humanities pretty much every year since, including Team Project Co-Chair in 21, Co-Chair of Humanities SSP 21, SSP 18, and SSP 18. She's the Associate Chair of Core Lectures, SSP 17, and Communication Activities at ISP 20, and lecturer in Space Humanities on the MSS course at Strasbourg in 20, 21, and 22. In her own work, Neve wants us to use the perspective of space to consider a smarter and more sustainable alternatives for all Earth citizens. She's a polymath with 2 degrees in engineering, a PhD in science, and almost 20 years of performance and writing experience, and she has been providing events for the general public in Europe since 2014. She has spoken at prominent events including TEDx. Her first book, Dream Big, An Irish Woman's Space Odyssey, was published in March of 2020 and launched virtually during Space Week after a 6-month delay due to the pandemic. She writes regularly for the BBC Sky at Night magazine. She continues to work on her personal art and outreach project titled Walking Slowly to Space, a global walking project to meet and chat with the diverse communities and share and exchange ideas about science, space, and wider messages of a safer, healthier, and fairer planet for all of us. So please join and welcome Neve to introduce tonight's panel.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Jim. Thank you. Thanks very much, Jim. That's great. And yes, we're joined by an esteemed panel, and then we have Angela here joining us as well. So I'll just check in with Angela first. So Angela, you're joining us live. It's streaming live as well, so we have you on Zoom. And then for all of you watching live, we'd love you to get involved in this discussion, so leave your questions underneath the comments of YouTube. Good evening, Angela Rodzinyak. How are you, and where are you? Oh, you're on mute, Angela. That's the classic Zoom thing. You did that on purpose, didn't you?
Can you hear me yet? We've been testing this for part of the afternoon.
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Okay, fantastic. So currently I'm traveling in southern Alberta. That was Ken and I's very first stomping ground together. And I'm looking forward to this evening's discussions.
Thank you, Angela. And you're very sorely missed here. There's a lot of people from last year's SSP that you've already been speaking to, but we'll all wave in, and we might do a selfie with you or something at the end, who knows. So we're talking tonight about the importance of outreach, and it was something that was very close to Ken's heart and to mine, and it's how we kind of bonded as friends. But we also have a great panel that are part of this year's SSP program. So let me introduce these amazing people that we've all had the privilege to meet in one way or another over the last few days as the participants, and for the community, we'd like to introduce you to these as well. So firstly, we have Dr. Dina Weibel, and she is a cultural anthropologist, and she'll tell us a little bit more about what that means. And her work, she likes focusing it on religion, and she uses that as a motivation and influence on space travel and outer space science. And she also appeared on Jeopardy! Good evening, Dina. You're very welcome.
You hear me?
Yes,
There we go.
we can hear you fine.
Boa noite.
Oh, very good.
I'm very glad
Very
to be
fancy.
here, and thank you for inviting me. And this is my first time in Brazil. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I live in Michigan in the United States. But I've done work on pilgrimage and sacred places. So a lot of what I've been focusing on lately is the idea of outer space as sacred space.
Very good. We might ask you a bit about Jeopardy as well, maybe at the end.
For heaven's sake. Okay. I was on Jeopardy in 2007. I did quite well throughout the game until I answered 2 daily doubles correctly. But when it came to the final Jeopardy question, I overthought it. So never mention Bavaria or beer to me ever again.
Remember that, guys, on Culture Night. Okay, thanks, Dina. Thanks
You're
very
welcome.
much. So sitting beside Dina then, we have Steve Brody. And Steve Brody has a very strong connection with ISU. He's called the rocket scientist from MIT. He's a professor emeritus of ISU. He has worked at many branches of NASA across Houston, Europe, and Washington. And we realized that we have a shared interest in the SOFIA program, which was an aeroplane that had a telescope on board. And I didn't realize that Steve was involved in that. We'll ask him to talk about that later. We also have a common interest in that he has a shared passion for the humanities, and he's done some really, really interesting stuff around art and astronomy, which we hope he'll tell us a little bit more about. So tell us a little bit more about yourself as well, Steve, and thank you so much for taking the time, for extending your stay to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's really my pleasure. It's a pleasure to see you all, many of whom I've met, and some if I have not, I'd love to meet you as well. I guess my dad started off. He said when I was a kid, I took up space in the house, and I just kept on doing it throughout my career. I was a child of the Apollo era, inspired as a child to wondering about what was out there, and that led me to physics and astronautics, but along the way to a shared love of international cooperation and inspiring the next generation, both when I became a parent, but also within my own community and the school kids around me, both as a volunteer for NASA as well as just a parent in my community.
Lovely, Steve, and we'll find out more about your some of the really interesting things that you've been doing during your career. And then lastly, we have the amazing Milton Diogo, and some of us have already met him. And Milton is a professor of mathematics at CEDEMP, which is the Entrepreneurial Education Centre. And I met Milton here, right, in Cefe? Yeah, I met Milton here in Cefe last December, and he's involved in educating the community in STEM and entrepreneurial skills. And they had their annual competition or exhibition here, and we were brought here as part of the local organising committee, and we met in the midst of all these amazing projects that the young adults were presenting. And I think you caught me and you started describing one of the students, and I was so amazed by the work that you did. I said, you have to be a part of ISU in 2023, and here you are. But for everybody else, tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm more used to be downstage helping than here upstage, but what a turn of events. I'm a math teacher, and we work at the CEDEMP, the Entrepreneurial Education Center, and we work with projects with some students. May I show my slides here?
Yes, that's a good start. Thanks, Milton.
A couple of slides. Oh, there it goes. And, well, this is. First slide, first photo, we have our team in CEDEMP. We are in 9 teachers, and my boss used to say, kind of a joke, we cost very little to the municipality because 9 teachers, we attend over 47,000 students. And we have 3 main programs. We work since the kindergarten. Some of the participants already saw this back in there in my workplace. And we go until the 9th grades, where the municipality is still responsible, not for high school. And in 9th grades, we choose one project for each of the 50 schools we have here, and the students build some projects in 3 main areas: services, products, and technology. And for technology is main cell phone apps. And I am the responsible to advise the alumni, the students in the technology part. And we have this kind of a workshops with them to work out some creativity, innovation, and to think a little bit more about the great ideas from the humanity, since from the toothbrush until the internet. And during the year, each group, they are preparing, and we started now in June this year, and the students, one group of 6 students, they have to create they have to think in a problem and to create some projects to resolve their problem. Most of the projects are based on real-world problems. And we have, in the end of the year, I think G2, Neve, and there's 2 more people.
G2, you were there.
G2 right there, Tanya and Mr. Brody. Mr. Brody, the other, Tony Mosher. We're here, and we saw 49 projects from the students. And our major aim here in entrepreneurial, this word is more easy to pronounce in Portuguese, Entrepreneurial Education Center, is to give to the students the proper tools, technology, each word of STEM education, in order to them to build something. It's a project interdisciplinary. And we have here a bunch of photos here, some of the students, their first photos. The students receive some PS4, the PlayStation 4, is a donation from a Brazilian version of IRS. I will get them later. And our main goal here is to cause social impact using STEM, interdisciplinary methodology, and to make the students the protagonists of their own lives. I will get them later. Thank you, Ms. Neve.
Thanks, Milton. That's great. And then, Angela, just back to you. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the activities that Ken was interested in terms of STEM, or even just your first thoughts about this topic that we're discussing tonight.
Well, I'll just tell you a little bit about Ken. Besides his very, engaged role in the Canadian military, he had an insatiable curiosity for all things space, and he would have described himself as a real space geek. He had a real passion for learning and sharing that information, not just with his colleagues, but anybody he encountered. It was that passion for space. It was infectious. It was contagious. He didn't look at where you came from or what you did in life. He just wanted to share, and he wanted you to share with him. And I think that it's that passion and that true interest in people that Ken had that really plays a role in STEM education and engaging the public in space, because it's all about igniting passion and getting people to become interested and understand how they're all part of it as well.
That's great. Thanks, Angela. And I mean, it's thanks to Ken that we have our lovely RCA interns as well, because he was part of making that happen for ISU, right? What year did that start? Actually, Alex asked me earlier, one of the interns, when did that begin? Do you remember?
Well, he attended in 06, and I think it was after he had attended the program and saw what value that the cadets could bring. It was a really valuable summer initiative for them to undertake.
Yeah,
so
I think they're having a good time. I think earlier they said they were having a good time. So I want you to listen in, and then maybe we're going to be talking for maybe about 45 minutes. We've just got a couple of questions, and then maybe we'll ask you then to come back and hear your thoughts on that. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Okay, all right, brilliant. So let's get cracking. So as I said, all of you here will have a chance to ask questions at the end. We're going to have a session for maybe about 45 minutes. We'll have questions, and we'll take questions from online, and then we'll wrap things up and maybe have a chat outside where you'll be able to meet Dina, Steve, and Milton and ask things in more detail. So, okay, so the first thing then I probably would ask, I'm absolutely passionate about outreach, and outreach means, reaching out. And, the reason I think why all of us are here is that we understand that a lot of people are curious, but they may not necessarily know how to begin. And for me, it began at a very young age, growing up in a house where my dad, really loves science fiction and space, and he encouraged me, as much as the rest of my brothers, to take things apart and be curious. And I owe him and my mom their plan for us to go to college. I'm first generation degree, and the only person in my family that has a PhD. And I attribute that to their plan for us, because they didn't have a college education. So that's why STEM outreach is important to me, because I think my community, I realize the importance of having that influence in my family, but not all families have that influence. So Steve, why is STEM outreach important to you?
Okay, thank you for that question. I am going to make reference to some of my notes.
No problem.
Because that is, I have two brains. This is the other one.
We all do.
Yeah. One of my earliest memories connecting my space experience to outreach, and this was to classroom outreach, to elementary school, was when my son first went to kindergarten, which in the States, that means he was 5 or 6, I forget exactly. I was involved in the Lunar Prospector mission. It was a mission in the mid-1990s that circled the moon for about a year and a half, showed very strong evidence of water ice in the South Poles. But it was also the first opportunity to take my family to see a launch. We were down in Florida at Cocoa Beach, south of the launch site. And even though I was active in the mission, the clue was, well, you get just about as good a view right on the beach like anybody else. So that's where we were, my 6-year-old, my daughter who was about 3, my wife and I. And we watched it. It was a night launch. So I was invited in to my son's kindergarten class. And I think the most brilliant idea I had was to ask my son to describe what he saw. And he got really excited and looked at his classmates and said it was like a fiery pencil. It was like a pencil on fire going up into the sky. I couldn't have described it any better. And that led me to think a little bit. My kids, my children, just because of my my good fortune to actually make a living in a field that I love and a passion for space, they always had it in our ecosystem, so to speak. We would go to launches, and they'd hear about things and see. But the other classmates, they didn't. I mean, there were a few other space-related parents around, but it really struck me. It was very important that it not just be those who had a direct connection. I really wanted to reach out beyond just my kids. And so I started to get invited. I think once the teacher realized I worked at NASA, she says, "Oh, you're a rocket scientist. You got to come in, got to do career day, got to come in when we talk about asteroids and comets and talk about this and that." And what was so rewarding to me is very often the teacher, as a thank you to me, would have the kids draw artwork and send me little thank yous. So I'd get this manila envelope about so big with all these, and depending on, the kids are, of kindergarten to 5th grade, so they're 5 to 10 years old. And I get these beautiful pictures of rockets and stars and things, and then these little notes about how much they enjoyed my coming in. One of my favorite was a young boy who wrote, I always thought I'd want to be a football star, an American football player. He says, now I want to be an astrophysicist.
Oh,
and I
brilliant.
said, wow, if I could have even that moment with that one child and could do it with others, it really meant a lot to me. And in fact, I remember years later when my kids were in college, when university, a couple would come over the house and they'd say, "Mr. Brody, you remember when you came in our class and you talked about it? I still remember that." And I said, I'm just honored that I made that kind of impact.
It's lovely, Steve.
And I guess I could talk a little bit more about what I did at NASA related to education, but would you like to go on at this time, or would you like me to?
Wow. Oh my gosh, yeah, because you've got the whole thing about the lunar games and everything, haven't you?
Well, that'll be
tell us,
for,
tell us a little bit about NASA then. Tell us a little
yeah.
bit about NASA.
Ju-
Yeah.
I'll try to do this very briefly
yeah,
because
yeah.
I want to get to questions and hear everybody else. Later on, during the time I worked on Lunar Prospector, I also worked on a number of other missions. Sophia is one of them, which stands for Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy. It's a 747 with the last third of the plane turned into a giant garage with a German 2.5 meter infrared telescope
Yeah,
in
it's
it
amazing.
that would open up at 747 altitude and every night do observing. So you basically an observatory that flies and lands every morning. And during that time, there was a very strong push, and I sure hope it stays till this day because I left NASA to come to ISU a while ago. But at that time, there was such a commitment to education and outreach that it was defined that 1 to 3%, and I forget exactly, of the total budget of the project, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollar projects, so even that small percentage for education and outreach was huge. Yeah. And every project had to commit that they would have an education and outreach part of the mission. And I made it a personal commitment that every 3 months, that I would go to the Jet Propulsion Lab or to the NASA facility in the Silicon Valley, and we would status the progress on the Sophia mission or Lunar Prospector or any of the other ones, Deep Impact, a few others that I worked on. I would say, okay, how are you doing on your education and outreach project? What's the plan for having teachers and educators, one of whom is sitting over here, that would eventually fly on Sophia?
It's amazing.
And what would be the plan to get students involved in these projects? And don't have NASA tell you how to do it. Come with your best ideas of how to engage and have educators working with you. So I guess that was my little, because I was so passionate about it, I couldn't let it go. Because usually everybody just wanted, on those quarterly, every 3-month reports, they just wanted, how are you doing on budget? How are you doing on schedule? How's the technical coming? And I'd say, that's good. We go through all that. How's that education and outreach coming?
That's great, Steve.
So I'll stop there.
It's so great though, because it's really important, because so many people are interested, but they just don't think like, the outreach part is important, and it's great to know that there was 1 to 3% always given by it. And having flown on Sophia with a group of German teachers, it was amazing. And we were on a pure outreach flight. We can talk about it later. You can ask me later, but it's an amazing. It's an awful shame that it got cancelled. It was just an amazing mission. It really was. So thanks for giving us a little bit. And you're going to talk about some of your specific work in a while. I know that. So I'll just pass then to you, Dina. I don't know if you do strict STEM outreach, but you're a fantastic communicator, and I know you're passionate about space. So you're reaching the general public. So why is that important to you?
Well, I really enjoy the chance to talk to people about stuff like you that I feel very passionate about, and talking to people about an area of space that they may know little about, such as the fact that people involved in space exploration, like humans all over the world, have religious beliefs. Not everyone, but a lot of them do. And for those who do, it's something that inspires the work that they do. And their understanding of space can also really inspire their motivation to do different kinds of religious activities. I have done some outreach. In fact, I can talk about that, or maybe the next question with Roger that. But a little background. As an anthropologist, we do have an Anthropology Day in February of every year. So I've done things, both my son's school, like Steve, and then also some of the local communities in universities. There's a high school I visit fairly often to talk up anthropology. But in 2017, and I don't know if you there's a slide. I don't know if I should do the slide yet or.
Sure,
we have
yeah,
it.
do the slide whenever you like.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you've 3, so you might have to go on one. Did you have 2 or 3 slides? Yeah, go on again. Yeah, go again.
Yeah, I think it might be the third one. Nope, I have to go beyond.
That's Steve, so go on, keep going.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm going past.
There you go,
the-
there you go.
There we go. So in 2017, my husband and I started what amounts to an outreach event in Grand Rapids, California called Roger That. So there was an Apollo astronaut from Grand Rapids, Michigan, named Roger B. Chaffee. And unfortunately, he was one of the 3 astronauts who perished in the Apollo 1 fire. Some of you may be familiar with. 1967, they were doing a test on the launching pad and in a 100% oxygen environment in the capsule. And there was a spark, and all 3 of these astronauts were killed during that test. Now, this was heartbreaking to Grand Rapids. You might not be familiar with Grand Rapids, but it's the 2nd largest city in Michigan after Detroit. But Detroit is very large. Grand Rapids is not as large. And so Roger B. Chaffee was really important. In the Grand Rapids Public Museum, they named the planetarium after Roger B. Chaffee. And in 2016, realizing that the 50th anniversary of this accident was coming up, my husband and I started thinking about how can we commemorate this event. And so because astronauts are known to say Roger that when they understand something, we thought that would be a pretty good title. I started talking to a friend of mine in engineering, friends in physics, because I'm a university professor. And pretty soon we had support to have a single event to mark this anniversary. We had Roger Chaffee's daughter come and speak. We had Brother Guy Consolmagno from the Vatican Observatory come and speak. And we had a number of student outreach activities. But the very first time we did it, we were kind of feeling our way. When it came to the second time, because it was so successful, we started a design challenge where students in local schools between the ages of, say, 7 and 14 could answer questions through a design, through a project about space. We focused on 3 areas. I think they're on the slide. Space and science, space and society, that's the anthropology influence. Got to have people in there. And also space and art. And we started a public conference where we would have a number of people come and from the local community and speak to our students, speak to college students, speak to elementary and middle school students. And it's blossomed into an annual event. We just had, let's see, I think we just had the 8th one. It might have been the 7th one. I think we're planning the 8th one. And it has turned into, I will say it, the premier STEM education event in February in Grand Rapids. So I'm being very specific there. We work with the Grand Rapids Public Museum. Grand Valley State University, of course, is involved. And it really has made a huge difference bringing astronauts to come to speak. We had Jose Hernandez at the last one.
Oh.
And we've had Eileen Collins come and speak, Nicole Stott. We had Guy Bluford is one of our first. In fact, he's in the picture here.
Wow.
The girls in this picture were middle school girls who won our very first design challenge competition and got to have their picture taken with a real astronaut.
That's lovely.
So it was a terrific way to reach out to the community. We look especially into underserved schools
Very
and
good.
really recruit them, recruit their teachers. My husband is now doing direct outreach, going to schools throughout the year to talk about space, to talk about the activities that you can do if you're interested in space, and to get students involved in our design challenge. So I'm very proud.
Yeah.
It seems to have kind of taken off, and we have people now telling us that they expect it each year, which is really gratifying.
That's fantastic. So if you're in Grand Rapids in February, you know where to go. Brilliant. Thanks, Tina. That's great. And then the same question to you then before we move on, Milton. So, for those of you that aren't part of the program, Milton came yesterday with some school children, and we got to watch together an astronaut live from the International Space Station. And you get up and you speak, and you're so comfortable, and you're just naturally kind of inspiring, Milton. And one of your former students is here as well, I understand, who's studying medicine, maybe.
Giovanna?
Where is she?
Where's Giovanna?
Where is she?
I think she's leaved.
Yeah. We should get her in a second. So what drives you? Is it maths or is it outreach? Is it people, or why is it important to you, Milton? Because you are really good. Because I just saw you and you were amazing that night. So why is it important to you, Milton?
Oh, thank you. First of all, I promise I will try not to sound like a YouTube motivational video. But let me tell you a story. Before that, what drives me? There is a Brazilian singer, my favorite one, called Belchior. And one of his musics is, he says, to love and to change things interests me the most. So what drives me is to cause social impact, to use education, STEM, and other people in order to give to the students so they can change the environment. So let me tell you a story about 7 teenagers. I put the slides here. Let me make a statistic first. Please raise your hand here. Anyone who ever have built a cell phone app? Raise your hand.
We've got 2 in the audience, just for the YouTubers.
2, 3 people. Okay.
2. We've 2.
2 people.
3 in the front.
I don't know. You can see the black shirts students. This picture is from 2022. We have 6 students here from a public school here from the municipality. The school is teacher Maria Antonieta Payar. And their group was selected amongst 630 ideas. And they built the project. They present to the judges back there in Entrepreneurial Education Center. And what they built a cell phone app of food. A food app, like iFood, okay? Everyone understand that. But why an app food? And the why is not important. The important here is, actually the why is important here. And how they make it. There were 6 students there, all right? I won't put any adjectives here. And they built an app. And their words, not mine, when they were do a pitch for the judges, they started, imagine that you live in a neighborhood the people say is a bad neighborhood. Imagine that you live in a neighborhood that has no zip codes in the street, and imagine, their words, not mine, imagine you live in a neighborhood near a penitentiary. So these 3 motives, they thought the food apps don't get there. They don't have iFood. When someone asks for a McDonald's or for some fast food that tastes exactly the same, they don't get there, okay? So it hurts in them. They thought, we want to have these things. So they want to build an app. And there is the logo app, Pinheirinhos Food, the name of the app, and 6 teenagers. None of them knew a thing about programming. None of them have one computer or notebook. 2 of them had a cell phone, okay? There is the teacher there, the blonde one, teacher Carolina, and there's my student, Giovanna, who was my student in 2015, and she's cursing medicine right now.
Oh.
Hi, Giovanna.
Well done.
Daughter.
What's her name, Milton?
Giovanna.
Giovanna,
right?
congratulations. So you are the product of Milton's excellent touch. So thank you, Giovanna.
So they didn't know anything about programming. I am the teacher responsible for the apps, and we use blocking programming from MIT. MIT App Inventor. It's really, really easy, and was the first contact they have with programming. Okay, so they built an app they didn't know anything about, using one notebook from their teacher. The teacher took their notebook. They spent the afternoon programming, seeing YouTube videos, calling me, professor, we have a doubt. There was one time they had a doubt. I couldn't help them because I wasn't in my workplace. So they watched a YouTube video in Spanish. That there were subtitles, but the blocks they had to translate one by one. And they built a fully functional app about food. The app worked. There are 3 main categories: services, technologies, and products. The Emperor in the Fair, which Nive and Jitu attended here last December, it's not a competition, but it is a competition. The main goal is to build the project. It's okay, okie dokie. So the second part is first, second, and third prize for services, technologies, and products. That group didn't win any of these categories. The judges was so astounding, so amazed, so dazzled, so wowed. The judges asked for us to create a whole new category just because of them. It was called social impact category. There were them in the photo receiving the PlayStation 4. Okay, so they had absolutely none knowledge about programming, and together with their teacher, Professor Caroline, I helped a little bit, but they construct a full functionality app food because their problems, okay? And the seventh, I don't know if you can see the photo there using the blue shirt, is Michaeli, almost Michaela from yesterday. She came from other states, here from northeast states, here from municipality. He studied in the school Professor Elizabeth de Paula, and he had the first contact with the S in STEM, the science, astronomy. And she attended to Brazilian Astronomy Olympics from Brazil. And she had one medal, a gold medal. Actually, she had medals in the plural. And she was so good, she nailed it. She was so good, she was invited to participate. She wasn't my student. I just know her story. I work with the science teacher of hers. And he was invited to participate for a program here in a prestigious public university here in Brazil, here in São José dos Campos, that was organized, I don't know if you know the organization, by NASA, okay?
What organization? NASA?
NASA, you know, NASA. And she discovered an asteroid. She was on the news, she gained a scholarship to do the high school in a prestigious institution here from San Jose. So, outreach and STEAM outreach and all the science stuff we are talking about here, for me, why is important? I prepared some notes here. I'm a little bit more old school than Steve. I bring in paper. What is the importance? Citizenship. It rescues some of the lost citizenship from a person. Our case here in the students. Solve real-world problems. And most of our projects here in Empreenders Fairs is about problems. The students, they think themselves in what problems they or their neighborhoods have. We had 49 projects. More of the half of them was about their own problems. There was a park for deaf children. I won't say the same mistake back there in the DA. Deaf children. There was a bicycle who produced energy. There was a bunch of them, right? Most of them thinking in real-world problems. It is about show possible destinies. Those students probably, they didn't know, they didn't think, I can be a programmer or can be anything else. In fact, one of the students, they are from underprivileged circumstances. One of the students didn't have a television to play the PlayStation 4, for you to know. But the professors, the teachers gathered together, raised some money, and bought them a TV. It is about show possible destinies for them. It is about to shorten distance. Perhaps if there wasn't the Empreender Fair, perhaps they wouldn't have this contact with programming. And is about students being protagonists of their own lives. Okay, so we take that to them, the proper tools, and we say, here, we can have a future about this, and these ways. That's right.
It's great, Milton. That's great. Thanks so much. It's really, really interesting. It's great work. And I think we're all passionate here about STEM, you know, so I think we've all been very lucky that we've managed to kind of have a career that got us to this moment in time. But you're right, there's a lot of us that don't have those opportunities, you know, and that actually brings us on to sort of the flip side. So we're all passionate about science and, you know, we want to do outreach, but it's sometimes difficult. It's not like, it's not sometimes an easy journey to, I was lucky, as I say, I grew up in a family where curiosity was normal, but not everybody has that start. So how do you begin that conversation? So Dina, like, the challenges that you've seen, or what do you think we can do better? Just that general, the other side. How do you start that conversation for people?
I think it's very important that you kind of reach people where they are. One of the things that happens with people like us who are interested in space is that we find that the folks that we come across don't always share that interest. And we talked about a little bit about this before, but I've found that with Roger That and some of the other things that I've done, if you can connect, especially I'm thinking to children, with an area that they're already interested in or an experience that they already have, or in some cases, and this is the one that I think I'm going to talk about the most, is bringing people who are in STEM that have similar backgrounds in history to the students that you're trying to reach. So when we had astronaut Jose Hernandez come last year, there was a local school that's officially bilingual. They teach both in Spanish and in English, and their teacher of science heard about our event and heard that Jose Hernandez was coming, and he brought the entire class of 35, 12, and 13-year-olds to come. And Jose Hernandez was wonderful. He gave his talk and then took questions for almost 45 minutes in English, in Spanish, including where in Michoacan is your family from, trying to find some shared connections. And these kids were over the moon, to use a phrase. They'd never thought that there could be an astronaut who had a similar background, who was from a particular town in Mexico, who had gone through all of this, and it really kind of opened their eyes. And I find that when we do bring folks in who have a connection in terms of, like I said, shared history, shared experience, families who might have worked in the fields growing up, that kind of connection is stronger than anything that I can do just by talking to someone. When I've talked to other kids, bringing in art that they're interested in, TV shows that they're interested in, but finding that shared kernel, I can do some, but some people can do it so much better than I.
Yeah, that's so true. And Steve, we'll come to you last. You've got a great example that kind of tags on to what Dina just said. I love, that project that you're going to talk about. We'll get you to talk about that. But I couldn't agree with you more. It's about finding that common ground, isn't it? Like some of us that took the science communicating thing, we were trying to find that common ground. You don't necessarily have to go straight in with the science. Find something that can start that conversation. Milton, what about your experience? I mean, you've been at the coalface, you've been teaching maths. How many years have you been teaching maths, by the way?
15 years.
15 years. What's your favorite? Algebra, geometry, triangles?
All
Calculus?
of it.
All
I
of
love
it?
numbers.
Wow.
I'm a nerd.
It's amazing. We could talk about maths all night. But anyway, but what are, I mean, that's a tough subject. Like if you don't have that kind of mathematical brain, beginning that for a young person must be tough. So what are the challenges around that, and how do you overcome that? Because that's a really tough one to start with.
Yes. I think the main challenges, thinking between the STEM education, to bring this I will talk about my background, the public schools, is to shorten distances between the schools, the teachers, the students, and the industry, the researchers, the scientists, and the institutions where the science is made. We have here in São José dos Campos, in the municipality, several projects of teachers using the STEM education. There is one example from the same school, from the teenagers with the food app, Professor Ana Paula. I really wanted her to be here today, but he couldn't. And twice a week, she goes there in the school voluntarily, and they have an astronomy club. They perform some experiments, built and launch some rockets, but it's a really, really good job. But I think we have to overcome these distances between those institutions. The SSP is kind of starting this. Me and my colleagues, we are having some access to the professionals from INPE, from ITA. I met yesterday, I don't know, Marcio, the Visiona, who's here, the gray shirt there. We talk about Professor Carlos from Alpha Lumen Institute, you met yesterday. Professor Inaldo from ITA, and we're talking about what we can do And to bring those students, we have to wow them, you know, like Steve and Diana said about the schools. We have to wow them, and we have to begin for somewhere. If I enter somewhere and say about some theorems, some solve for X stuff, they will sleep, you know.
Yeah, I did anyway when we were doing theorems.
Yeah, we have to find some common interests. If we can bring some students to the IMPI, for example, and they say, oh, here is where you predict the weather, you say how much degrees are going to make tomorrow, or to Visiona, or to Embraer. So, wow, this is the way that airplanes are built. You know what? We really need to shorten those distances. I think this is our greatest challenges.
Yeah, I guess, you know, to kind of make it real and make them see it's not just in a book. You know, for me, like I was okay at school, but I was kind of stuck in the book, you know, and then when it comes alive, like once there was YouTube, I mean, that wasn't that long ago, I started teaching myself loads of things. So I agree with you. I think it's about bringing it alive and bringing expertise in so that it doesn't just feel learn this off by heart, you know. But yeah, that's a great solution. Steve, you have an amazing example of this connecting and thinking outside the box about how to inspire people around and people who won't be, you know, who aren't your natural curious kids. So tell us about the project, the Lunar Games, and how it all came about.
Well, thank you. Yes, in fact, picking up exactly on some words that Dina used, and I have them right here too. You need to meet people, meet students where they are. In other words, what are they interested in? What is their life story? What's foremost in their mind? Don't expect necessarily that people, just because you show them a great picture from the Hubble Space Telescope or you show a video of a space shuttle taking off, that they're going to be as wowed or excited about the space field as you may be. I was given a task, and this led directly to some student outreach, but I was giving a task at NASA headquarters. How can we help people who are not in the space field, don't think about space? How can we give them a sense that there is a spacefaring future for humanity? And it's not just for the astronauts, and it's not just for engineers or biologists or whatever. And I had the opportunity to work with an artist, Patrick Rawlings, a great space artist in the States. He had done some work for my office at that time, and I had a little bit of money left over, and I said, Pat, let's work on something. And I'm not sure if it was his idea or my idea, but I said, let's talk about sports in space. Because you may not catch people in space, but pretty good you're going to catch some people interested in sports. And when you marry the two, maybe there's a winning combination. So he did a couple sketches for me, a zero gravity kind of thing, which was a little bit hard to project an Earth-like experience. But then it came with, let's see, what might the Olympics look like on the moon someday? If humanity is truly going to be occupying the solar system, jump forward. And then we don't know, we're talking about 100 years, I don't know what. So he did a picture, which I'll show in a minute. But let me just say what came of that. It was an oil painting. He was a very diligent artist. He researched, okay, with only 1/6 gravity, how high would a pole vaulter go? How much weight would a weightlifter lift? How much time would a gymnast be in the air? And could you do sports that we can't even think of or can't even do here on Earth? And he did actually show the physics behind human-powered flight, where if you have a certain type of wing structure, strong enough humans could flap and go around. So let me show, if you could pull up my first slide. This is
Leave the clicker there.
Oh,
yeah.
clicker. Okay. See if this will do it. They'll go forward. Let's see.
There it is. Oh.
There it is. So in the end, the oil painting, we took the oil painting, and I went around NASA headquarters. I begged, borrowed, and stole money from about 4 different organizations. James probably knows how this works. We printed 200,000 of this litho, About half of them were given out during the Summer Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia, where NASA had a big exhibit from Huntsville, Alabama, of 2 huge 18-wheeler trucks mocked up like what the space station will look like someday, because this is before the ISS was launched. And I'll read at the bottom in case you can't read it. It says, in the 21st century, will the moon become a place where people live, learn, work, and play? With only 1/6 Earth's gravity, imagine pole vaulting to incredible heights or new events such as human flight. Do I have a pointer on this?
I don't know if it points.
If
Sure,
not,
sure.
well, the pole vaulting is there. You see on the top there's a holographic projection of the basketball game that's taking place in the stadium right next door. The stadium here is covered by a material that we called unobtainium, because we don't know how to build it yet. But when I use this in classroom outreach, I said it's for you future scientists and engineers, figure out some of this stuff. We've got the banners around there that ties in the commercial support, just like Olympics on the ground. GNN over here, Global News Network, beaming the games back to the Earth. You got little spaceships coming in with parents and visitors. You've got the human-powered flight athletes up there on the upper right. And so I worked, so Pat did this painting for us, and let me see if I can go. This is the back side of it. We worked with at least one educator, if not two, to come up with, well, what should we say on the back to help teachers use this in the classroom? So about half of the lithos that we produced went to education and outreach centers at the various NASA facilities around the country to support teachers in outreach. And the first part of it describes what you see, raising questions such as thought-provoking questions, like if you have people that grow up on different worlds, what will be the meaning of the title world record? Well, you have to define what world you're talking about. Is it fair to have somebody who grows up on the Earth under that gravity system to compete against somebody that might grow up on the moon? So all of that are topics for discussion, math exercise. How far would you kick a soccer ball if you're on the moon? That sort of thing. So this was basically done for public outreach. But then I started to visit, and one of the things I did as a volunteer for NASA, NASA had made it a goal with partners and volunteers to try to reach in certain underserved populations. And we've used that term before. Generally, these are populations where the socioeconomic situation is not the average, it's below average. Often the school systems are such that maybe you would not find a rocket scientist likely in the parent population that could visit the kids regularly. So there was a commitment, and there were cities and towns across the states chosen. One of those was right in my backyard, Washington, D.C. So I was one of a whole group of volunteers that in one given week we would go to visit every 6th grade class, and 6th grade is about age 11, 10 or 11 or 12, in Washington, D.C. So it could have been somebody from NASA like myself, or people from the aerospace companies or nonprofits, or professors from local universities. Just anybody that had the time that could come in, give an hour to a classroom, and just talk about what do you do in your world? What is your life like? And I remember just being so struck going into these schools, the enthusiasm of the 6th graders. I mean, there is something about this stage of development of children, any of us who have seen their own children go through it, there's a sensitivity, I think, that kicks in right around 6th to 9th grade, from age 10, 11 to 14, 15. Lots of things are happening in these kids' lives, including biologically. The hormones are kicking in. There's a lot of peer pressures. And there's also this sense of, what am I good at? What do I want to do? What do I want to study? Can I take math? Am I good at math? And there's a lot of subliminal messages in the environment. Unfortunately, some of them are negative about what you're good at and what you're bad at. But I remember taking pictures like this and finding that some of the kids in the classrooms I'd be visiting, yeah, sure, they would be interested in Jupiter and rocket launches and showing a video of what it was like from a camera point of view on a rocket. But then I'd say, how about sports in space? And they throw out the favorite sports figure at the time. Very often it was, think about Michael Jordan on the basketball court, how long he could stay in the air before he could dunk the ball if it was only 1/6 gravity. And so using something like this, you get to connect where some of these kids are, where they may not be normally, and see, hey, there's something here, and maybe I'd like to read what was on the back of this and learn a little bit more. And there was one other, if I may, incident of this summer camp. There was a woman who used to work in the Office of Space Science, where I was at headquarters, and she and her husband ran a summer camp in one of the roughest, and I'd say rough from a point of view of poverty and lack of opportunity section of Washington, D.C. But she would run a summer camp for kids from elementary school up through middle school, and every year she would ask somebody from her office, the space science office, could somebody come out and talk to the kids? And I remember going there and going into this class, and there were different age groups, and sitting over by the windowsill, what looked like a tough kid. You know, he's like sitting over there on the windowsill. I am not going to show much interest in this, you know. And there were different age groups, and there's a little bit of chatter, and the teacher's trying to keep or the camp person's trying to keep everybody quiet. And I started to do a few things that showed about sports in space, as well as showing a video of launching on a rocket, what it might look like. And then I put up this chart. I remember it was a chart of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and the fact that and I started to talk about the possibility there may be ice moons with liquid oceans, and who knows, maybe there'll be life forms that we will find. And here's one moon that we call the pepperoni pizza pie moon, because it looked like that's Io. It has volcanic explosions on it. And all of a sudden, there was this chatter in the room. This kid sitting over in the windowsill, he says, "Hey, be quiet. I'm listening to this." And I just went, oh my God, I actually connected with the gang leaders, so to speak, the kid that everybody respected and listened to, and they all got quiet. And I said, I guess I did something right. And it felt so good leaving that class to realize that you don't always know what's going to hit.
Yeah.
But if you try to go where they are, reach them where they are with something that may interest them, then
Yeah, and you never know, like the other thing is you just never know the impact that you have, you know, that can have a lasting impact and completely change their perception of themselves or the course of their lives. Dina, did you want to jump in there?
Here we go. I wanted to follow up with what you were saying about sports. Roger, that is funded in part by the Michigan Space Grant Consortium, which is NASA. And one of our events we went to, there were some college students from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where it's cold and snowy many months of the year. And one of the ways that you can get exercise and do sports in the snow is on fat tire bikes. They're bicycles, but they have very big tires that distribute the weight so that you can go on the snow. And this group had decided that fat tire bikes were one of the best ways to go across Mars. And I fell in love with the idea. So the next time I gave a presentation to an elementary school group, I started with riding bicycles on Mars. 1/3 gravity, it would be fantastic. So I love that idea.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And you know, you just don't know how long the impact is. And studying a little bit about the sociology of what you've just been talking about, that connection that you're talking about, we all are here because of the influences that got us to this point, the number of people that were telling us that a career in science or space is perfectly normal. And they're the barriers that you're trying to break down. It's like what you were saying, Milton, as well. And they call it like a science capital. So you can't just leave it solely to the teachers to help a young person change their perception of themselves. So if their home isn't filled with wonder and curiosity, they can still kind of have a career in STEM or in space or whatever if they're watching programs, if they're reading books, if they're watching YouTube, if a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or a teacher or a friend or an ISS live link up, those things, if there's enough of them that happen at a certain phase of their lives, they can actually kind of start seeing a future for themselves. But if there's no influences at all, even if the child is really good at science in school, the likelihood of them seeing themselves having a future in science is less and less and less. Which brings us kind of to the last question before we kind of start to wrap things up, and we want questions from you and we want to hear back from Angela. We don't know what the future is going to hold, right? So, Milton, I'm going to start with you because you're working with young people all the time. So, how can we prepare them for this future where it is going to be very technical, very digital? Like, what do you see happening in terms of your job as a teacher, continuing to inspire them and believe in themselves that they can have this future in STEM or these skills in entrepreneur? Where is it going? What do you see? Anything about the future, your response to that?
From my point of view, you asked me before if I think it's going to be more digital or more hands-on. I think it will be more hands-on. The digital is an amazing tool, helps
really?
a lot.
You think it's going to be hands-on?
I think, from my point of view, at least for the background of public education. Steve and Diana said about connection. I think the hands-on is more easily to awaken the curiosity from the students, for the children. There's a friend of mine, Diego. He's right over there in the front row. He is an aeronautics engineer, and he built and launched rockets with their 2 kids. And this, I think, my point of view, is more easy to awaken the curiosity from the students. And I think the future, and we are talking this on my workplace for the next years in Apprentice Fair, to focus on solving real-world problems, either with the digital or more hands-on. But I think the hands-on learning is help more the students to be more curious.
And you see that already? Do you see that already in what you do? That rather than kind of sitting in front, sitting at the front with a blackboard or a screen, that hands-on activities, it just connects better for them?
Yes, we have here in the municipality programs in the schools about robotics and a bunch of STEM education. Professor Williams of IT, he's somewhere around here. One of the coordinators. I'm sorry. And we saw this. We see this in children. When you put them to build some robots, they are more wowed if they are in front of a computer.
Yeah, very true. What about to you then, Steve, as somebody who's, you've had a long career at NASA, you've been involved in ISU for many years, you've seen people, you've seen their careers grow. So what's your future prediction, or what do you think is going to happen, or what do we need to do to prepare for it? Because the space sector isn't going away, right? I mean, there's going to be more and more demand for people being more skilled. So what's your answer to that question?
Indeed. I don't know what is going to happen. I have a sense of what we need to do, and I've sort of made I've tried to find my own little way to contribute to that.
Please, yeah.
One thing I've been doing in the master's program of ISU for about 3 or 4 years before the pandemic, and they're going through a reevaluation, so I haven't been able to travel there and do it again. But one of the interactive, fun lectures I do with the masters is going to the class. It's basically called techniques for classroom visits. And from the 20-some years of having done it, I know a few things that you shouldn't do. I know a few things that work, like talking about sports. I came up with a little game called Who Wants to Be an Explorer, built on the TV show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Not Jeopardy.
With
Not
life,
Jeopardy.
Not Jeopardy. Although my wife's brother was on Jeopardy. How you like that
okay,
for
how
a
do you know?
connection? And so I share all these things. I said, here are different ways of doing it. Feel free to take this, make it your own, put in your own questions into these things. But I try to hit on a few things with the master students, and that is the motivation. I talk about receiving these beautiful little thank yous with the pictures on them from the kids, but also about how significant that they can be. If you're a young professional in this field, you're doing some of the most interesting and exciting things. Don't wait till you retire and you're working on, and most of what you process is paper. You know, in my 20s, I was climbing all over the space shuttle, getting it ready for the first launch. But I never thought about going into a classroom. I didn't have time, but I probably could have carved out at least 1 hour in the year, and I probably would have done 2 hours the next year and 3 hours just to go into a classroom. I learned that later, and I want all of the ISU young people to have this sense of the impact they can make in a young person's life. So part of it is one of the things I really think we need to do is to mobilize the young professionals, both in the public sphere, private sphere, whatever organization, your own company, whatever, and in STEM disciplines, but also not. I like to give the example of Lynn Klein. When I was at NASA, she was number 2 in the Human Spaceflight Organization, NASA headquarters. She was the equivalent of a vice president, and she was like deputy to the vice president, in charge of all shuttle and space station. Her college degree was history. It wasn't a STEM field. But here she was making some of the biggest decisions related to the human spaceflight program. So just like so many here whose backgrounds may not be in STEM subjects or whose future path may not be, what you do in communicating the excitement of the projects you're involved in, and then reflecting on the fact that if you're not wowed about math, sorry, Milton, or if you're not excited about becoming a zoologist or a botanist or whatever, if you want to be a historian like Dina's husband, and you want to chronicle the developments, and if you want to be an artist like Pat Rawlings and others, there are so many roles both for those in the STEM fields and those outside, but the space has a way of capturing your heart and your passions. So that's one. Whoops, where did my note go?
Yeah, that's a real.
There it
While you
is.
look for your note, that's so important. There's an avenue in by so many different fields,
Yeah.
because space really is interesting to most people, and particularly at a young age. What other nuggets have you got there, Steve?
So I think I already mentioned this, especially key age, and I say from age 10 to 14. There's just so many things going on, and if you have to prioritize what age group you try to make an impact with, I would really try to focus there, because there's something about where does curiosity get sidelined, where does the passion that makes a kid want to raise their hand. 6th graders, 5th graders, man, those hands go up. Then a little bit later, they're looking around. Do I want to raise my hand? Maybe that somebody I have my eye on from the other sex will look at me and think I'm too smart, so maybe I shouldn't raise my. All that stuff's going on. So I feel. And then I'd say, it's not just for young professionals. It's for the bosses. It's for the corporate executives. It's for the founders of companies. And I will say this to any ISU founder out there, and I'll talk to some organizations like SGAC, the Space Generation Advisory Council, to get the sense that we can really do a lot, we collectively. And if they set the framework that says, you as a young professional working for me You're going to do our community good. You're going to do our next generation good. You're going to do the workforce pipeline good by taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedule and to help if you live near a teacher, if you have one in the family, if you, wherever you work, or maybe when you're visiting your home community, if somebody says, wow, you're doing that? Could you come in and talk to my kids? I would like every young professional in our field, certainly ISU graduate, to be able to say, yeah, sure, when can I come in? But have the confidence that you can do it. You know how to handle, I tell you, some of these young kids, they come up with the craziest questions, and sometimes it's just as easy to say, wow, that's a great question. I bet your librarian might be able to help you to find the answer to that. Or maybe somebody else here has an idea. There are ways of handling things that put you on edge. I also found out, and at first I was a little bit shy about being labeled a rocket scientist, although I did study astronautics, so it's about as close as you can get. But it has a cachet. Some of these titles, almost a week doesn't go by that somebody says, you shouldn't have to be a rocket scientist to cure X, Y, or Z. So there is at least in the English world, and certainly in America, there is a sense of a cachet, a significance of that. I say ride with it, you know. I remember going into some of these inner city schools, the teacher would say, oh, here's a rocket scientist. They just wanted to come up and touch me. I was just so embarrassed. Why do you want to touch me? I'm a dad. I got a couple kids. You know, I have my own headaches, you know, getting to work and getting in traffic and all this kind of stuff. But there is a cachet, especially as James knows, you just have to say you're from NASA and, you know,
NASA
you attract the crowd.
I mean, NASA has world renown. Like, it's amazing.
So I think that's it, is the...
You're great, Steve. You know,
offer, you know, there are these kinds of things about how to visit the classroom, the impact you can have, and having outlets. And I'm constantly looking for other ways to do more than what I can do now.
And I find as well, like older people as well, like they're just as interested, and sometimes they can get overlooked too. Like, it's great to go to schools, but communities just in general, you know, if ever there's a time, people are just interested. And I think, yeah, I mean, NASA just has a cachet, but then all these new companies coming up, they're just as SpaceX, Blue Origin, all those people are beginning to understand them, because the world of space, people are getting to know about it, and they want to know about it, and there's great careers. So Dean, I'll ask you that question then. What are you seeing? Like, what is the future? How can we prepare for that, or what's your response?
I've decided I'm going to argue against Milton. I'm just kidding. I think hands-on is very important, and I'm not taking away from it. But instead of saying either or, I want to talk about both and.
Yeah.
Because I think the digital is amazing, and I think I've got one more slide somewhere here. Because COVID made a lot of changes around the world.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
With Roger That, we used to have a speaker come in the morning. We would have different conferences, like a conference with local people from the Grand Rapids area or across Michigan come and talk. And then we would have an astronaut speak in the evening. And when COVID happened, hit us the first time in 2021, because we were just before it started in February 2020. Like, we had Story Musgrave come and Alice Bowman come.
You were lucky.
And we were very lucky. But then the next year we had to go completely online. And something really interesting happened. When we went completely online, we didn't have to have speakers from Michigan. We had speakers from around the world. We had an astronaut, Leroy Chow, speak digitally. But our audience was also not just people in Michigan. It was global. And so on the slide here, you can see some of the speakers we've brought in. We have Mutlu Bursin, I'm going to mess up her name and it's blurred, but she's a Turkish astronomer who is someone who was able to have a galaxy named after her. It's going to kick in my head a second. We have Asif Siddiqui, who is a very renowned expert and historian and space history, mostly focused on the Soviet era. And he's in New York. We have Louise Proctor, who works at the Applied Physics Lab, and she was able to come speak to us. And then down there is Jamie Draper, who is actually locally from Grand Rapids, but he now works for I guess it's now the Space Force Museum. in Florida and broadcast live from Cape Canaveral. We couldn't have people from Costa Rica, speakers from Australia, all together for our little, our base budget is $5,000 every year. So the idea of bringing people in from around the world was amazing. Also, this depends on where you are in the world, but my son who's 15, Luke, he's a digital native. He has been online since he could talk, basically. And using things like VR, we might be on vacation, doesn't mean he's not playing paintball with one of his friends or doing something else that involves people around the world that he's gotten to know through online. I talked to you earlier about VR, virtual reality, and watching the Artemis 1 launch in virtual reality live, as big as life, from my living room. So this idea that you can transcend boundaries through the digital, you can create friendships. I had a completely digital relationship with you before.
That's right, yeah.
Right, we talked on Zoom, we did a number of things online, but we had never met until yesterday.
Yesterday.
But I feel like I know you quite well.
I do too, yeah.
So this idea of friendships and connections from nation to nation across different boundaries that used to be mountains and oceans that really made a difference, now we can communicate in real time. That doesn't mean the hands-on isn't important. I mean, students would always rather meet an astronaut in person than meet an astronaut online. But you had students talking to somebody in the International Space Station.
Only yesterday.
And without the digital, you wouldn't have that. So I think we want to incorporate the in-person, we want to incorporate the analog, but we really want to bring the digital into it and use it to our advantage.
Yeah.
And I think one of the benefits, if you can say there was a benefit of COVID, is that it taught us how to overcome the distances.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, you're reminding me about the metaverse, which is something that, ISU is involved in as well, where you have online education, but it has that 360 feel, and who knows where that's going, and I've experienced some of those videos that were prepared by Felix and Paul Studios for now. They are unbelievable. So maybe that is the future, but I think ISU are certainly trying to think about that for your future as well with the metaverse. And there's a team project about the metaverse this year, and so it is a topic and stuff. I'll go back to you, Angela, because if anybody has any questions, we do have some microphones. I don't know who has been given the task to rove the microphone. I see Harriet touching Beranger there, so I presume it was Beranger's problem, or unless there's somebody else doing the microphone. But Angela, what are you hearing? What did you, because for a very long time, like, Kenn was really passionate. I had so many amazing conversations with him about outreach in STEM, and he had some great ideas as well. What did you hear in that, or what's your response to all that for the last kind of 45 minutes?
Well, I just was sitting here thinking, man, Kenn could be giving this lecture.
Yeah.
All the being brought up, reaching people where they're at. I mean, that's key. Not disregarding where they're coming from and reaching them with where they're at. So I remember Kenn going to an elementary school, and he was talking planets that day, and all the balls he was rounding up at our house so that he could give perspective. So there were the basketball, there was the little pickleball, there was all these, the little golf ball. So he really made things come to life for people, and I think that's been key, and I keep hearing that over and over again in this conversation.
It's so true. It's so true. Anybody got any questions? Anyone got any? Oh, there's a hand up. Put your hand up. Put your hand up in the air. A's. Put your hand up. That's from a session. Don't worry about it. It's an in-joke.
Nice.
It's an in-joke.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Can you tell us your name? Because I don't think Steve and Dina or Milton have had the pleasure.
Farouk here from Egypt and Canada. So my question is something you mentioned earlier, which is you never know the impact you're going to have on someone. But I also believe that's part of the challenge of outreach is it's very difficult to quantify that impact.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to fund an outreach program or justify it, how can you actually try to show the impact to someone else who wasn't there at the event or to people who are going to fund that outreach program so you can keep doing what you're doing and have that impact?
That's a great question. Thank you very much, Farouk. Does anybody want to take it? Anybody want to take it first? Dina's putting her mic on.
One thing that's part of the digital thing I was just talking about is Roger That's got a YouTube page. And so some of the talks that we have are sort of preserved for future folks that we can show. And when we were doing the conference events, we had classes tuning in to watch them in person. So I think being able to record things like this,
Yeah, yeah.
they kind of live on, and you might not realize that somebody 2-3 years from now, if you're watching this in like 2027, hello, I'm talking to you directly, these things kind of do live on. And so it's exciting to know that they have a life beyond just this moment.
That's true. That's impact. I think I agree with you, Farouk. It's one of the most difficult things, but I think it's about values, and it's about finding companies or whatever. And certainly NASA has some, their values obviously are steeped in outreach. But I think the finding people whose values match yours around your passion for outreach, that's how things get funded. And I've been funded by a lot of, by our Irish Science Foundation Ireland is the name of it, and they're always looking for impact. And, they compare it to say like, a science project where, you have evaluations and you have surveys and everything. And I don't think it captures it, but I think it's back to what Steve said. I think when you get a bag full of drawings from a child, then you know what impact is, and capturing those stories in a way. And imagine if you had a video the day you saw the tough kid, and him kind of saying, "Stop talking, I want to hear it." I mean, that's huge, and that I agree with you. They're difficult moments, but I think those stories travel, because you still remember that story. And how long ago was that, Steve? 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Let's see, it had to be, it's about 20 years ago.
And you've never forgotten it, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder where he is.
That is clear as a bell.
Yeah, so it impacted you.
Yeah.
And then look at the impact we just had tonight with Giovanna. How many years ago did you teach Giovanna, Milton?
2015.
2015. So it's 8 years ago. 8 years ago. Well, there you go. She's studying medicine. So I think it can't be measured, but I think it's a feeling. I think it's an energy, and I think it's something around positivity and knowing you're putting back into society. Social impact, I think, Milton, is really important. Steve, please.
So I'll just say one other word, and that is there are a lot of folks out there doing this sort of thing. So reach out to them and see where the state of the art, which it is somewhat of an art, or state of the practice is. One organization comes immediately to mind just because of my U.S., because I live in the U.S., there's an organization called the Challenger Center for Space Science Education. It was created by the families of the Challenger astronauts after that tragedy. And it turns out the CEO of that organization is Lance Bush, SSP alum from 1988 or 89, whatever, great guy. And that organization reaches out to school kids throughout the states, maybe beyond the states, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But because I'm a minuscule little donor, I get emails and newsletters, and there's all these numbers they throw out about how many students are reached, how many teachers get educated through these programs, and how, et cetera, and the multiplier factor of educating somebody like a teacher or training somebody else to go in as an ambassador to the school. So don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot out there. Add your thoughts to it and see what they're already doing.
Yeah. Milton, for you, having touched 46,000, affected, I should say, 46,000 children in schools last year, how do you measure impact? Do you have to prove your impact in schools to get funded for the next year, or how does that work?
No, actually, we don't have to prove any with the statistics and stuff, but we have a kind of a collection of all the projects, and we collect also some testimonials from the students. Então,
testimonials, Yeah, that's great. And since Farouk is said he was from Canada, Angela, is there anything in Canada that you know about from Kenn's work that that he could find out more information about getting involved? Are there communities? Are there organizations to help? Do you know off the top of your head?
I know one of my first stops would be the CSA, Canadian Space Agency.
Yeah.
Because they've started funding education again. They did away with their department a number of years ago, but they found how important outreach is to get public interest and support. So there's programs starting up again. They would be my first stopping point.
Yeah, yeah. And then I'll say for Europe, so the European Space Agency has an education and resource outlet called ESERO, E-S-E-R-O, and every member state of ESA has an ESERO office or a manager for each country, and it's their job to kind of work with teachers and provide content and roll it out and stuff. So I hope that answers your question, Farouk. Do we have any other questions? Oh, we have a question here. Yes, Alex.
Hi there. I'm asking questions on behalf of our very engaged YouTube audience who have been very, very vocal in their appreciation of this panel. The first question I have, because it's flooded, guys, I've got a lot, so if we've got time, what are the first steps that parents can take when they realize their children like science in general? This comes from Fabio Novisky.
Thank you, Fabio. So what are the first steps that parents can do when they realize their child has an interest in STEM? How do they grab that and continue it? As a parent, answer that question, or as a teacher, answer that question, and then I'll throw my own 5 cents in. Anybody? What do you do? Steve, were your children interested in STEM?
Well, STEM wasn't an acronym when my
science,
kids were
maths.
growing up. I remember my sons, you would expect that they would be interested in some of the space stuff, because I have a hard time not showing my enthusiasm for it
because you're
sometimes.
so passionate about it. Yeah, it's infectious.
So it's thank you. So I remember my son coming to me and saying, "Dad, I have to break it to you. Space. I'm not as interested in space anymore.
I know, and it's
I'm
heartbreaking.
now interested in underwater exploration." I said, "Oh yes," because I'm a diver now. So he's interested in discovering something. So it led to something else, which of course is involved in all STEM. So what I do, I celebrate. But I would say, in more direct answer to the question, is encourage. Do whatever you can. Don't feel bad about feeling like maybe you're over your head. It may not be your field, may not be your own passion.
Yeah.
But there are, as a saying goes, it takes a village or whatever. There are librarians, there are researchers, there could be aunts and uncles, it could be cousins, where the connection can be made, and solely just trying to be there for that child and say, well, you know what, why don't you talk to Uncle Milton? He's coming to the house for whatever,
maths.
and does he know that stuff. Or how about online? Oh, and I mentioned, I found, I'll mention this just because I can't not recommend it. My favorite website that's been that way for 20-some years is Astronomy Picture of the Day.
APOD.
And anybody that doesn't know it, Astronomy Picture of the Day, apod.nasa.gov. Every day, 365 days a year, is a different picture. Could be from the latest from the Webb telescope or Hubble. It could be an old Apollo picture. It could be a beautiful aurora sunset over Norway. But then there's this very common language description, sometimes humorous, like why is this nebula called the Tarantula Nebula? Was it spun by some great, gigantic, a spider in space? And it'll go through with hot links. Anybody can use the search engine at the bottom, the index to find, you name it. You can even find 3D images of the terrain of Mars where you put your little red and blue video game glasses on and you will see 3G relief on your personal computer. It's mind-blowing. And so there are a lot of resources out there. You don't have to know much, but you just have to be encouraging and say, well, why don't you put that in a search engine and see what comes up?
Yeah.
Or talk to Miss or Mrs. So-and-so at school that you know that child loves and see what they have to say.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I might answer that as well, if you don't mind. Would you forward the slides to the very last slide, where it's just a me with a company of keep going. Back one, forward, back, divide by two, exponential, coordinate geometry.
Isn't that, I'm pushing,
algebra.
it's not doing anything anymore.
Berenger, magic your magic. It's the very last slide. Very last slide, Berenger. Yeah, that's the one. He has it. So this is a picture. So you're talking about adults, right? So was it Fabio who asked that question? Fabio. So I think this is very common. There's lots of parents who feel that they don't feel that they are equipped to answer the kids' questions, and they feel that they're ill-equipped. So this is, I consider this my best work, and it was with 5 women there. And Dana is from Greece, Susie is from Italy, Sharon was from my hometown of Dundalk, come on the town, and then we had Maria from the Czech Republic. And I was working with the library, and this was a funded project to work with parents of children who were really struggling in school, but they really felt that they could do more as parents. And so I started kind of teaching them space initially, and I kind of started talking about, what they were interested in. And it became a kind of a story for them that they felt that they weren't equipped to talk to their kids about science because they had such a bad experience around science. And so I worked with how to undo that for them and kind of empower them to be curious again. And I'm afraid to say, Milton, maths does an awful lot of damage to parents. So algebra was one thing that came up. But when we started working together on algebra, their confidence grew, and they realized that something just happened in their schooling that went off the track and made them think, I'm not good at maths, I'm not good at science. And it began this story in their heads. And so I worked with them for about 6 months and got them to change the story in their heads. And we got them to the point where they were asking about philosophy. They were asking, Dina, that's right. Oh
yeah,
my God, we had
I'm looking
Dina.
at them. I'm like, I know those ladies.
Oh my God, I'm so glad I brought this up because I forgot you. So tell us about what happened. So it was Susie on the left that started realizing that there was a connection between religion and space. And I was like, oh my God, I know the exact person. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Neve brought me on, and I got to do a little bit of a presentation and then answer questions. And these ladies were not shy at all about asking questions or knowing about science. And so I found myself fielding all kinds of questions, from very specific technical questions about my research to parenting questions.
Yeah.
And they were fantastic, and they were enthusiastic. And it was really inspiring.
Yeah, and they went on then for Science Week, which is our national kind of week where we celebrate science, and they all stood up. Now, they'd gone from nothing, from having a fear of algebra, where they stood up and they talked about David Sinclair's work on aging. They talked about religion and philosophy. They talked about agriculture, climate change. I was blown away. So it's about finding the common ground, and it's about having one conversation at a time and just taking your time. So Fabio, if you're a parent, it's I think you don't have to know everything, but you just have to start being curious, and the answers are out there. So I don't know if we've time for any more questions. Do we have time for any more questions? Yes. Harriet. Gosh, Harriet, you're very pushy, Harriet. Harriet's very pushy. She's my TA in humanities.
Come on.
Look at her laughing down the back. Harriet.
No,
Casey.
it's my
Casey's
question.
from Australia. Hello, Casey.
I'm from Australia. Oh, stand up? Okay.
Yeah, Casey's from Australia, and she loves outreach, right, Casey?
Yes, exactly. I love outreach and science and STEM in general. I wanted to ask a question because we've spoken a lot about impact this evening, or you guys have discussed impact a lot. and how it can fundamentally change the lives of particularly maybe youth that find a sense of curiosity or awe when they start to engage in STEM. And science itself is quite an impacting discipline and field, and that sometimes comes with scientific research or application of research that can be super detrimental, whether that's positive or negative. And there are all these cases in history with really controversial, I guess, end results that really and truly affect our daily lives and I guess the world as well, whether it's something like the atom bomb or the rhesus monkey experiment. And yes, like these are a bit controversial as well. But I guess my question is, how important do you think it is invoking a sense of moral agency when you're doing outreach, particularly with youth, and speaking to, say, the philosophy of science and really engaging young people in this idea that what you do, it may affect people's lives, and this is important to consider. And how do we do that? How do we outreach through that?
So you're talking about connecting society with science and helping them understand our shared responsibility.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Does anybody want to answer that? And do you want to put the holding slide back on? Because those poor women will be marred though. Thank you.
I can go ahead a little bit with
thanks,
it
Tina.
because this is something that interests me as well. Even though as an anthropologist, I'm trying to maintain an open mind, when I teach about anthropology, whether it's to my own students or whether it's as part of outreach, one of the important things in anthropology is understanding people that are not like yourself. So realizing that people in other cultures do have hopes, dreams, thoughts, complicated, experiences. There's a tendency to assume that if I don't know about something, it doesn't really matter. And when you begin to realize the complexity of other people, I think it's teaching empathy. And I think empathy is something that can be taught. I think it is incredibly important. Australia, when they were working on their space program, there were indigenous people living in the interior who were in places where rockets would land and drop, and trying to move people out of the way was a good short-term thing, but it also meant that it was sort of seen as disposable communities. And not picking on Australia, everywhere there's been a space program, there have been people surrounding the area who have been displaced, who have been kind of cast aside in the name of progress. And I think instilling a greater understanding of the complexity and worth as human beings of people around the world is incredibly important. And I also think the future of space needs to include more voices.
Yeah.
There's a tendency to have the same people making the decisions over and over again and not really thinking that anybody else matters because they haven't participated so far.
Yeah.
And there needs to be, an expansion of who's included and whose voices matter.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's really important for us to make the topic relevant to that person. So, when I talk about communicating science, make me care. So you've got to find that common ground. And I think once you do that, it kind of, I think it switches people on, and it makes them kind of realize that there's the impact to all this and our responsibility, our shared responsibility. And I think if you don't do that in outreach, what's the point? You see sometimes outreach where they're going, a bin full of balls that are going to explode due to liquid nitrogen. That's great, but what is the impact of that? I think if you don't connect that to why you care about that is because we're talking about temperature and we're talking about pressures and we're talking about, our planet and our atmosphere. It's important that it isn't just like, what's it called, edutainment, that actually it always has a social reason or that you can connect the purpose of what you're talking about to the community you're trying to connect with. Do we have time for any more questions? I'm just conscious of time. No, Jim, thank you. Just say no, because we'll be here all night. That's it. You've got to stop me. You've got to stop me. I will just want to thank everybody very quickly. I'm going to, Angela, thank you so much. We miss you terribly. What's it going to take for you to come next year to SSP? It's in Houston, by the way.
Oh, that might be enough of a draw.
Okay, good. We'll have her back next week, next year. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope we've done Kenn's name. We've represented him well, and hope that you feel that he was very present in this discussion all night.
Oh, it was a wonderful panel. I thank you guys very much.
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time from Calgary to join us. So you're always here, even though you're not here. You're always here. I want to thank this amazing panel, Dina, Steve, and Milton. Thank you so much. Also the tech team, Shafé, Berenger, thank you very much. Harry, Casey, all of the room here, thank you so much. It's, these things don't just happen. And also our lovely local organising committee for making it possible, and all of us again. And oh, there's presents coming. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, back to you, Jim. Thank you very much. I've stopped now.
Very good. We wanted to give you guys, there's a gift from Salcedo's campus as well as one from the university, just something simple to remember the event by. So we appreciate it. After we really get done, let's gather up and take some pictures together.
So, thank you.
Very, very, very quickly, it's running a little bit long tonight, so this is, like I said at the beginning, this is the final of the sixth of the series of Distinguished Lectures. We still do have program activities. We have a rocket launch. We have a balloon launch. We have, I believe now we have some team project out briefings or things that we're going to do. I believe that's going to be here in this facility, so we'll get those things organized and announced. Other than that, thank you very much, and let's give them one round of applause here at the end, and have a good night.